Since before recorded history, the people of Britain have had first-hand experience of the strange and unusual. Spirits who haunt ancient castles, stories of werewolves and banshees roaming the countryside, and fantastic creatures like gnomes, fairies and pixies, all firmly embedded in our native folklore. This cultural experience makes us uniquely qualified to research these types of phenomena and help us find the truth of the reality that surrounds us. So sit back and relax as your hosts, Irene Allen Block and Mark Johnson, take you on a journey through this strange realm and together help us find the answers to the mysteries that lie just beyond our grasp. Welcome to Paranormal UK Radio.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Paranormal UK Radio, the flagship show here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm Mark Johnson, and our normal host, Irene Allen Block, is not with us again tonight. She has posted on social media. She just lost her mother a few days ago, and something that they've been expecting for a while, so she's dealing with that, but she is going to try to be back next week's show, so send out your thoughts and prayers for her and her family at this time as they're dealing with their loss. Before we get started with the show tonight, good Lord, I got to mention a few things that have been going on. Again, our thoughts and prayers go out to Northern California, around the Santa Rosa area, for the terrible fires they've been having out there. If you haven't seen the footage that people are showing, I'm not kidding. It's the whole city seems to be gone. Neighborhoods, streets upon streets of empty fields where houses used to be. It's really incredible. And I'm here in Colorado Springs, and our air is all hazy now from the smoke coming in from California. So, between all of the hurricanes we've been having and earthquakes and now fires, it's just been a really insane time these last few months. For prayer warriors out there, just keep it going for everybody who's in harm's way right now, people who've lost their homes. Our thoughts and prayers go out to you. And hopefully, we get a reprieve here soon, because I don't know about anybody else, because this is starting to get old. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and get right into tonight's discussion. We have two great guests. We've spoken with them before, previously on Unknown Origins Radio, and they're back with a brand new book called Orbducted. Well, that's right, I said it right, Orbducted, in the French Quarter, and we want to welcome Alta and Chad Dillard to the program. How are you tonight?
Oh, doing well. Thank you so much for having us back, Mark.
Oh, well, thank you for coming back. And I have to admit, this is probably the most interesting title I've seen on a book for a while, instead of abducted, Orbducted. And when did this book come out?
Just last June.
Just last June. So this is all brand new here.
All brand new, yeah.
Well, before we get into discussing the book, can I just ask you, for our audience who may not be as familiar with you, just tell us a little brief bio of yourselves and how you got into investigating all of this?
Well, this is Alta, and again, we can't thank you enough for having us on the show again. It's wonderful to be reunited with you, and so sorry to hear of your host's experience and her loss, and our hearts are with her. And certainly with all that you're going through in terms of the atmosphere and all of this chaos around us. Chad and I've always used the term consistently. I feel we're arranged. The word arranged in 1990 in Little Rock, Arkansas. At the time, I'm 10 years older than Chad. I was 33. I'd never been married. I'd had no children. You can do the math. Chad was 23. Had never been married prior as well. And there's just no doubt to me, because of I borrowed the term long ago, excuse me, that I think just applies to all of this, the term of high strangeness. And that's that just fits perfectly to me as far as I'm concerned about everything that we deal with. the high strangeness of it all. And there was a great deal of that involved in what I feel was our arrangement. Then ultimately we married a year later after the arrangement, with the decision that we had never intended to have children. And so we are now, 27 years later, still married and no children. A lot of critters in our life, furry, reptile, small alligators, you name it, we seem to have had it. In terms of our family, that's our little family unit. 1995, we had what we understand was our first together encounter with a massive UFO in the sky. It was still somewhat light out, so we clearly could see what we saw. And I've always been honest to admit, I feel my brain exploded, and I looked away instantly because it was just, I was doing everything I could to make it a non-event. But we'll have Chad describe to you what it was that we actually saw, because he did take it in.
Yeah, we were coming into town for dinner. It was an early dinner, so it was still pretty light outside. This was in Hammond, Louisiana. And we were coming around this bend in the road. There were kind of a group of trees. And when we get around this bend of the road and this group of trees, we look up into the sky, and there's this, I don't know, mothership. It's just, I mean, it's huge. It's kind of a rectangle shape, but not as wide on one end as the other. Very black, flat, kind of on the bottom. 2 or 3 lights in the front, 3 or 4 lights in the back. Moving very, very, very slow, if at all. And we kind of look up at it. It's to the left, on the left-hand side of the road. I'm driving. We look up. I kind of look down at Alta. She looks at me. I look back up at it, and just to make sure I saw what I saw. Now, I mean, when I say this thing was big, this was like football. This was stadium size. This was just, I mean, it was bigger. There was a big Walmart shopping center there and everything. And it was bigger than that, just, and pretty low. It was below cloud level. It wasn't like way high up in the sky. And I mean, we look at it. I looked at it the second time, and we never said anything about it, to each other, like, what is that, or anything like that. I just focused my attention, and Alton, focused her attention, back to the road. Like, okay, if we don't look at it, if we don't see it, it won't know we saw it, kind of thing. It's what I felt. It was crazy. Like Alta said, my brain exploded, and I didn't know how to deal with it.
So we essentially didn't deal with it. We, I believe both of us felt, as I've said before, like this was a non-event in terms of our comprehension. The problem we have with that is that we discovered the next morning or the next day, we hear it in the news, the local news. Others had witnessed as well because they reported a UFO. So, of course, that made it real for us, but we still chose to not have any dialogue about it. We never spoke about it. I'll also mention that neither one of us had an interest in this area prior to these experiences as well. Before I go on any further, just to add to the curiosity of the story, I am understanding that I'm born in the deserts of Arizona of mixed native blood in the late 50s. My mother chose to leave my birth father when I was about 6 months old. She claimed a couple of times in my early life, but it was not something I ever questioned her about. She's now since crossed. So she's not physically here for me to have dialogue with her about any of this, but she indicated that when I'm about 6 months old is the only passenger in the car she's driving. She says it's daylight, and that a small metallic craft or a UFO came out of the sky and stopped her on the road. Now, as crazy as all of that might sound, it certainly did to me. I don't remember anybody ever challenging my mom making that statement. So when she would mention this, the very few times she ever did, I would disappear out of the room as quickly as I could get away from it because it just sounded too insane to me. So when I say I have no interest, I absolutely had no interest in any of this. And then Chad as well, to the best of my knowledge, he didn't seem to have much interest in anything space and certainly very little interest in sci-fi. So when this event happens to us, we just work hard to go back to our old way of thinking, like that's not real and that can't happen, and it didn't happen. So within a very short amount of time of this experience, we chose to move to the French Quarter, which is about an hour away. This would have been, again, in 1995. When we moved to the Quarter, we moved there just very youthful thinking. We'd not had children, so we live very spontaneous, and we're not prepared at all for what we're moving into. We're extremely naive and not prepared financially, emotionally, for any of it. So we end up, our first location of residence is because of economics. And again, who knows what all the hidden hand is involved in this? I've had 20 years to just process all of this. And I can't come up with any direct answers. So to me, it's just this huge ongoing mystery. But in retelling it as we understand it, we end up moving into a small apartment above what is known as the original Voodoo Temple. And it's on the perimeter, the outer perimeter of the French Quarter. This complex had been built back in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And these are still its original structures. I'll just mention this because I'm not sure how much you'd like us to go into these experiences, particularly at that location.
Well, we have a 2-hour show, so feel free. And I have to say, I'm just, I feel so sheltered. I've never been to New Orleans. I've always wanted to go. I'm dying to go and see the French Quarter, and I haven't had the opportunity yet. So I feel ashamed to admit that. But
well, we look forward to you visiting and us showing you all of this. Chad's an amazing tour guide, so we just look forward to that.
And Chad, I hear you're an amazing chef too.
Yeah, I can hold my own.
well, just not to sidetrack us real quick. My ex-wife had a catering company in New Jersey, and her chef that we worked with, this young guy. Let's just say I learned a lot watching him and working with him. I will say he was phenomenal. So I have a real appreciation for chefs. Yeah.
Well, I was in the restaurant business most of my young adult life. So, and, as a teenager, I started fairly early in a pretty nice restaurant back in my high school days. So I love to cook.
And I love him cooking. Let me say that.
I bet you have to really struggle with the diet too because of that.
Oh, well, I've gotten so old now that I guess I've just gotten comfortable. I have my moments, and he's still seeming to appreciate me, and I'm certainly appreciating him. And, of course, he's tall and very slender and couldn't gain weight if he tried. It's just, the nature of the beast.
Chad, I hate you already.
Just not fair.
Yeah, no, it's not. Anyway, I'm sorry for sidetracking. Please continue.
No, that's an enjoyable subject, I assure you. So some of our experiences, and I'll have Chad share with you a couple of them, very dramatic in his experience in living above that voodoo temple was, did I mention, and let me remind all of us how naive we were. I come from a native background. I have my full regalia. I've had it most of my life. And even though I'm not raised with the people, my mother raised me pretty independent and on her own around the different parts of the country and different places in the world. But I always understood, my heritage, and that was enough for me. I'm also told that I'm French and Scottish. So I appreciate those tribes as well. And so when I say naive, I mean naive. Voodoo and all of that kind of stuff just was stuff you saw in the movies, and just not particularly anything I had any interest in nor any knowledge about. Chad, I will mention as well as we move into this portion of this experience. It was in my particular case, and I'll not go into the details unless you're interested. In my particular case, I had what I call a time slip, a very specific time slip that seemed to involve, and I preface the word seems to have involved, the possibility of Virgin Mary type, not apparition, I've used that word before, but she was full-bodied being, at the same time inclusive with 3 females that may very well have been females that had been slaves on that property back in the early 1800s when those structures were created, because some of the complex was old slave quarters that had been turned into just adorable little efficiency apartments. But all that energy is still very much alive and well on that property. So I had, and then I also had the assortment of poltergeisty kinds of experiences, and just a lot of, I consider myself, and my mother considered me, as sensitive anyhow. And so with that kind of language, just opened up to all kinds of craziness going on around me. But we'll have Chad share with you, a couple of experiences that were very up close and personal for him.
Yeah. This was like the first week that we had lived in the apartment. And we go to bed and I'm sleeping, and I kept feeling like something was crawling across my chest. So I'd go up and I'd scratch. And, this happened 4 or 5 times throughout the night. And, the next morning I had scratched, a couple layers of skin, and it was always in the same place. And, thinking about it, if it was, so say a bug crawling on me, it wouldn't be in the exact same spot every time. It would be, on my shoulder, on my chest, across my face, whatever. So, that just kind of really freaked me out. I go on to work, get dressed. I was working in a restaurant at that time. So I get ready to go to work, and I'm doing my tables and everything. And, this vision starts coming back to me, this memory, I guess. And I remember, being there, laying in bed, and I would feel something on my chest, and I would go up and scratch, and I could see this very short-statured African-American man. He was, free-floating above me, horizontal, He had no shirt on. He had just a few beads. Now, I could only see him from his waist up. From his waist down was kind of a misty, kind of smoky, kind of, whatever. And he had a few, like, little trade beads, African beads around his chest, around his neck. And he would take his finger and tickle me right there on my chest, kind of right around my heart area. And I'd go up and scratch, and when I went up to scratch, he would pull his hand back and, dissipate. And again, this happened 4 or 5 times throughout the night. So I get home, and again, out to being Native American, she's always had her sage and, her smudge stick. So, and she wasn't at home at the time. So I grab her smudge stick, I grab her fan, and, I light it up, and I got the smoke going, it's going heavy in there. And I start saying, I'm like, hey, I don't know who or what or whatever this is. I don't know who you are, but I said, I'm going to paint the apartment. We're going to clean it up. We're going to have us a really nice place. Just leave me alone. You don't have to go anywhere. Just leave me alone. And about a month or so later, another couple had moved into the apartment down below us, and they had been married by the voodoo priest who had died recently before we had moved in. And apparently we were in his old apartment apparently the voodoo priest and the voodoo priestess didn't share quarters. So they start showing me their wedding pictures. Actually, they start showing me the wedding pictures before they tell me this. But anyway, they're showing me the wedding pictures, and they say, this is priest such and such. And they hand me the picture, and I'm like, oh my God, this is who. And I told them the story that I just told you, and they're like, yeah, that makes sense, because he was kind of a trickster, and he would kind of test you to see if you were cool enough to hang out with him or be in his presence or be in his space. So it just seemed like he was testing me. So that was pretty crazy.
It's the things you think of after something happens. If I woke up and I saw this big black man sitting down tickling my chest, I'd be like, I think I'd be screaming and punching.
Yeah.
Thinking somebody had broke into the house. But, as someone who has also kind of gone through the same experiences as you, I know that that's usually not what happens when we're in that state.
No, I guess I thought it was just a dream and just go back to sleep or whatever. But, it was crazy.
And how old were you when this happened?
This was, what was I, 20?
Oh, probably about 20.
95, so I'm
25.
50 now, so yeah, about 25.
Well, you hear of all the different types of hauntings and paranormal activity, or not only in the French Quarter, but all throughout New Orleans. For such rich Southern history, you can't beat it with, going all the way back to colonial days, to the Civil War. A lot of people don't realize that it was surrounded, and there was a big siege there during the Civil War before they finally took the city. Because, again, one of those big ports coming in off the Gulf.
Yeah. Well, they're having their tricentennial. I mean, this is 300-year-old city.
And at this time, also, just to add for the creepiness and the interesting to me part of all of this, little old us who's got no interest in voodoo, hoodoo, she-do, not our interest, end up right in the heart of it. Also at the same time that they have just finished filming Interview with a Vampire. So now that genre is hot off the press, and all of that interesting energy seems to be afloat. And, here's two little dumplings just get dropped right in the center of this. As I said, very naive and not prepared. And maybe that's the good thing. Maybe just dumb was a way to do this, to stay safe and kind of roll through this, just taking notes, as they say, as it was happening. Because it wasn't too long after this experience. I also mentioned, we've never really said this, I don't think, in any of our interviews. And so much of our book had been edited. So to what you have received, there was, there's a whole lot more content to it that we found that if there is interest in what's going on with us, we certainly intend, if possible, to try to add a few more small books to kind of fill in all these blanks. Because at the same time that we're going through these experiences and this type of energy, we're also being befriended, and we befriend a young woman who is an amazing artist in terms of jewelry making, lapidarius and stone cutting, and she's just got an amazing eye, and she's originally from Utah. Now here we are meeting in the French Quarter. Well, the reason I bring her up is I have a photo of her with myself in my regalia. My mother had come to visit, and she's a native elder. In her regalia, we're having a big ceremony. Somebody captured this all just perfect in a photo that I keep on my desk. This young woman's family own a small horse ranch that absolutely borders the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, if you're familiar at all with what I'm...
Oh, yes. Extremely familiar.
Right. And so, now I don't know Skinwalker at the time either. This is 1995, and this is all new info to me. Now I'm learning a lot because people realize that I've got my regalia and my native background, and so they're entrusting me with information that I don't think they just go around telling the world about. And such as, friend and her family, she just kept telling us over and over again, Chad and I, we needed to go to Vernal, Utah. And I'm like, that's a very interesting name, Vernal. I know a lot of places. I don't know that one. And she just kept saying, you want to see petroglyphs, you want to see alien, you want to see space stuff. Well, no, I wasn't saying nothing about that at the time. It was, we weren't asking for any of that. But she was certainly offering it to us that this was the location to see all of this stuff. And again, not even aware of what Skinwalker was really about to hit the world force about, all of this high strangeness. So here we have this mix in the story. And then relatively not long after this happens with Chad and the ghosty, as I like to refer to him, the ghosty priest, voodoo priest, I'll have Chad pick this back up and share with you a phantom fire that took place there.
Yeah, this was in the middle of the night. Alta wakes me up and she goes, I smell smoke. And, of course, like I lift up, I sniff, I didn't smell smoke. You're dreaming, go back to sleep. All right. Not, within 10, 15, 20 minutes, I smell smoke. Well, okay, that means I got to get up. I hear it this time. So, but this time, I really raised my head up, and about that time, this little drift kind of smoke comes into the bedroom, and I'm like, oh God. So, in any fire in the French Quarter is like a 3-alarm fire because the buildings are so close, everything's so old, fire spreads fast. So we jump up out of bed, we run down the stairs, grab the dog, jump down, run down the stairs, and we're like, fire, 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 out in the courtyard. So the voodoo priestess comes out, the guy that lived in the apartment next to us, he come out, a couple of other people that lived in there. Now everybody comes out. And, we can tell that the smoke's coming from the temple because, we get over there. I think
there's smoke billowing out of the temple.
I think the back door was even open or something, So we go inside the temple. Somebody dials 911. They're there quick. I mean, they're there within minutes. They're there, and so it's myself, the voodoo priestess. Because when we go in there, we see the smoke, but there's no fire. And about that time, the firemen come in. There's about 7, 8, 9, 10 of them.
There's a bunch of them.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not a huge place, and everybody can see smoke, but again, no fire. And we're looking and looking and looking, and all of a sudden, we get to one of her altars, and it was her and the voodoo priest's wedding anniversary. And she had a special altar for him and her. And so she had the candles down, but she had like her wedding dress and his wedding suit, up on the wall. So one of the candles down on the floor burst, and it traveled down across the floor, went up. You could see where it burned up the wall, and it stops right at the pictures of the saints and like Jesus and all. If it would have traveled above that and caught her dress, I think it would have been, much worse, a lot worse. But that was another thing that was really, and the firemen were just like, okay, it's time to go. It's all, it's time to go, time to leave here. It was really crazy. It creeped them out. And they're born and bred here.
On top of that, because I'm out in the courtyard with all the folks, the residents that lived in the slave quarter apartments and priestess, so on. Maybe she's in the temple with everyone. I don't remember, but we're all out there. And of course, this is the middle of the night. And it was if we were on honest to God, was like we were on a movie set. weather-wise. It was as if there was an invisible director yelling, hit the weather switch. And insane lightning was going off all around us. I mean, insane lightning and big thunder and no rain, but just all of this sound.
Big cracks of lightning. And yeah, it was right. It's right on top of us, pretty much.
Right. On top of us. Like it was just to add to the effects, the sound and the lighting effects of, this very crazy experience. And then from the human perspective of it, we're also engaged with, now again, in our naivety, all of a sudden now we're dealing with big movie companies out of Hollywood. When they needed to make a movie or something about, as I say, voodoo, she do, they made contract with this voodoo priestess, and what better place to do it but the authentic location. And so now we're dealing with big movie companies and film companies in that courtyard. We had the largest courtyard at the time, our understanding, I believe, of the quarter. And so, but large courtyard, no courtyard, it was still packed with filming. And so that's not fun when you are really not in the mood to be dealing with this to get in and out of your apartment. Kind of a humorous part of it is some has-been actors were in trailers right in front of the location. Those were their party houses, just getting partied out before they'd have to go in and do filming. And again, it just gave you a whole different perspective about movie making and this and that and kind of the hassle of it all. So that, along with, again, other strange and assorted types of high energy. The voodoo priestess had a chicken coop at the end of her complex that was full of live chickens. Very strange to see in a city, at least from my perspective. And then it's not so strange anymore. It seems very typical now, but certainly at the time. She also had a huge boa, alive and well, that she wore quite graciously in middle of her ceremonies with all the voodoo drumming and so on. And again, I love snakes, so it wasn't an issue to me as such. Again, just more to the ambiance, I guess, of this environment. But it was not an environment that I ever felt comfortable in. Maybe in the beginning, just out of the strange childlike curiosity of it all, but it didn't take long for that to leave. And then I just wanted out. I felt personally, on a personal level, without sounding victimized, I felt victimized, to be honest with you. And I just felt like, this was not an energy that I was melding with and didn't need to. And it's time to go. We got to go. And so another hidden hand seemed to be involved in opening up doorways for us to leave that location, move closer into the heart of the quarter in what was considered extremely desirable neighborhoods, if you will, the kind of things that you see in the documentaries when they're showing New Orleans or the French Quarter with the beautiful balconies. And we ended up moving in a townhouse such as that, and this townhouse was already furnished. And when I say furnished, just to give you a visual, this furniture truly did look like it was something out of a castle. It was opulent. We had crystal chandelier in our living room. We had one in our bathroom. I'm talking about crystal chandeliers. That might be normal to other people, but it just wasn't to us. And then marbled encased desks and marble encased fireplaces, a couple of them, and
baby grand piano.
Right, a bed that looked like something truly out of the castle.
This was all original furniture, so you had that vibration of all these many years, and that
in that furniture also. That's right. So just to paint that picture for you, here we're coming out of one extreme right into another. Now, lucky us, because we're not lucky kind of people. but because everything has a cost. In this case, it was, again, the trickster element was we were getting this townhouse for little to nothing in rent. Now, that's unheard of. That's unheard of. It should have commanded a lot of money. And that was not the case in our case. Well, when I say grateful, we're extremely grateful. And we are not looking a gift horse in the mouth. We are just moving in and just getting on with life. Now, I'll have Chad share with you something he remembered me saying from the time he and I had been arranged about 1990, probably within the year of us getting married, and that's about my turning 40.
Oh, yeah. Alta told me a couple of things, when we first got together. She said that she was told as a young child that she would never mother her own, but she would mother many. So that kind of
Very
is one
mysterious.
thing. But the next thing she told me is she goes, I can't wait until I'm 40 years old. Now, what woman says that? Not very many.
Yeah, none.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, I can't wait until I'm 40. This is going to be I'm going to have a life-altering change on my 40th birthday.
It's going to be big.
And yeah, it's going to be big. It's going to be life-altering. So, okay, all right, well, so.
Well, kind of again with that build-up, now we fast forward, we're in 1997. It's about to be my 40th birthday. So I'm beside myself. I've waited a long time for this moment with no clue at all what I'm facing, just beyond excited. And so this is about the day of my birthday. My mom is living at the time in Little Rock, Arkansas. She is in bad health, and she wants to relocate to the French Quarter where Chad and I are, and we want her there very badly. So to the point of where we've pre-rented her a mother-in-law cottage in our courtyard. Because again, we live in a beautiful location. The mother-in-law cottage was just adorable. It was perfect for her. So the whole plan is she's coming to kind of surprise me for my 40th birthday, and I'm just so excited because this is what we're living for. Well, that was not allowed. So in fact, she died on my birthday. And with that said to you, the impact of that has taken me all these years to be able to repeat it without coming apart inside because it was just so big. I've still never gotten, I don't say it often, but I still have never gotten past the anger about who does that? What in the world? Who takes a mother away from an only child? And, on their birthday. And it was also, I might add, to the moment she had told me I was born is when she's pronounced. So it's just more of this cryptic, crazy message. So, with that cryptid part, I might also, sorry folks, if anybody is kind enough to hear us, if I might just also interject this part that we left out in the very beginning. When Chad and I are arranged in 1990, my word, brought together, I love Chad big. He's my love. He's, as I say, he's my beloved. So it's not for lack of loving him, but again, I'm positive there's something else involved with this. We discovered within 24 hours of the arrangement, because there's a lot of high strangeness involved in it, that Chad's grandfather, who had just died prior to me, not just, but within a couple of years of me meeting Chad, the world knew him as George, but his birth name that's on his tombstone, his birth name is Alta, and of course that's my name. His last name is Duncan, and that's my mother's name. And so I'd like to just add, I always say, what are the odds? What are the odds of this? My name is just so weird. And the fact that this is a man with this name. I mean, it's just, again, just what are the odds? So now, again, back into the 1997 experience, my mom dies on the birthday. The impact is beyond measure. We have to deal with all of her effects, long distance. We return to the French Quarter, and I am broken. Chad is also, but he's managing better than I am. Whatever joy I felt was gone. and it's just trying to get through each day. So I kind of throw myself into work. Chad's kind of an entrepreneur, kind of building his own way in the world, and he's doing real well. The one thing I'll mention about the effects of my inheritance, one of the things that we chose to keep, or I chose to keep, that I couldn't part with, was my mom's telephone. Not because it was worth anything or attractive or anything of that nature, but it was the last thing that my mother had tried to use to get help. And so I couldn't part with it. Well, let me mention this. We bring that phone and intend to use it in our real life. And that phone was haunted. There is just no other way to put it. To the point of where some representative with the phone company suggested that to me. Well, honey, did you ever think it could be haunted? Is what this woman says to me over the phone, when they've done everything they can to try to help us understand what the hey is going on with this phone, such as pick it up to go use it, and there are people having conversations, but these conversations are in languages I can't begin to tell you what they are, and I got a pretty good ear for languages, male and female. Other high strangeness involved with this phone, to the point again where we got this phone company representative suggesting it's haunted. So I'm in agreement. I don't want to play with this phone anymore. So we found a happy home for that phone, with the person knowing that it was, we felt truly haunted. Well, they loved that idea. So they got the phone, all with knowledge. And then 3 months after my mother passes, on my 40th birthday, I'm working in a shop at the time. I'm kind of building us into the Orbduction, the title of the book. I'm working in a shop that is a family-owned business. They started their business in 1929. So at this point, they're 70 years in the business. They are pretty exclusive. They are open to the public, but they're dealing with every genre or type of personality, celebrities, sports phenoms, royalty, you name it. They seem to have a connection with it. Well, that's, an interesting world for me. I'm not taken too much to celebrity, but I'm just aware of people and personalities, and kind of find myself as a good observer. So it at least keeps it interesting, as well as folks of all walks of life come into this shop. So I'm throwing myself into work. They've hired a young woman. She's known as Christine in the book. She is at the time 24. Chad is 30, and I've just turned 40. She is aware of my pain over the loss of my mom. She asked me one night if I wanted to go out into the quarter and have dinner and drinks. I agree. We called Chad. At the time, our townhouse is only a couple blocks from our shop. So the whole point is Chad is going to get changed and walk over and meet us, and we're just going to go out and have a spontaneous evening. Chad does just that. He meets us at the shop. We step outside of the shop. She locks the doors. It's how we know exactly what time our night started, around 9:30. As soon as we get outside of the shop, I remember taking note and saying it out loud, that it just felt weird. The energy felt weird. It felt off. Don't know how to explain it any better than what I've said to you, because it was not something I'm used to walking around saying. But that's certainly what I was feeling. They took note of it as well, and so be it. We take off to start our night. We decide we're going to, again, keep it very spontaneous. None of us had children. We didn't answer to anyone. So we're going to start on one end of the quarter that's about 13 blocks, I understand, square. And we're going to start on the famous Bourbon Street. We're going to start on one end, and we're just going to work ourselves across the quarter. That's the goal, with nothing more planned. So again, I guess maybe for time's sake, I'll just say this. There's a whole lot to this that we love to share. So again, with, time allowed and what have you, we can certainly go back to it if you like. But from the moment our night started, it was off. And what I mean by that is there were no people in the quarter. There were a few stragglers, a few. But I mean so few that it felt vacant. Like, it felt very Twilight Zone-y. That's my interpretation of it. There's no people in any of the restaurants or the bars. There's no wait staff at the places had restaurants. Every location we stopped at, 3 very specific locations all the way across the quarter, had one what appeared to be human, as either a bartender or a manager or what have you, but that was it. So there's no party, and that's what we're out there trying to have, and it's not happening.
And that ain't fair. And that ain't fair when you're in New Orleans. Let's just face it.
Yeah, and you know, the first place that we stopped at was a place that I had worked at.
Right.
You know, so we knew the band, we knew, you know,
the owner, we knew the managers,
the managers, you know, anybody that had been there for any amount of time. You know, the late night bartender was just this, you know, amazing guy. His nickname was Freak. He was 1,000 years old, and you know,
extremely knowledgeable.
Great I mean, we would just talk about all kinds of just, you know, philosophy and, you know.
He's not around. Awesome. Nobody is around.
Yeah. You know, I mean, nobody's there except the manager, you know, which we knew. And, but, you know, we didn't stick around and talk and, you know, hang with just him. We were trying to find some place to go.
Now, he did make us a house drink, all 3 of us. But none of us remember drinking it because all we remember is how bizarre it was in terms of nobody's here. It's the largest location. It had a dance club, a restaurant, a courtyard restaurant, a cabana bar. I mean, it had the whole caboodle, and there's nobody. It's empty. It's vacant. So we're not thinking nothing paranormal to the best of my knowledge. I'll speak for myself, or high strangeness. None of this. This is just effing weird. And where is everybody? So we find our excuses and say our goodbyes and leave that location. And as I said, we're discovering this all the way across the quarter. And so the cover of the book is the actual photo of the last corner location that we headed for. And that was where our lights go out or open up, however you'd like to see it, because that's the last corner the 3 of us collectively remember, and it's 11 o'clock. So we've been out there an hour and a half. I'll just preface this to the best of our knowledge. No alcohol, no drugs, nor did there seem to be anybody around to drug us. And then the last thing that we remember, because we've discussed this, of course, is us sitting on a stoop, me sitting on a stoop, Chad standing kind of over me on the stoop, which is about a half a block off that corner down the street. And me just saying, I just want to go home. I'm so bored. I don't even want to walk. I just want to get a cab. I just want to go home. And Chad, somewhat in agreement with me. And then the next thing I know, now keep this in mind, this is 11 at night. And then the next thing I know, it's the next morning, somewhere between 8 and 9. I am sitting straight up in my living room on my brass daybed. I'm rubbing my arms, aware that there's something in my upper arm, my left upper arm, or, there's something getting my attention of my left upper arm. I have memory, because I'm coming right out of this memory. I don't wake up, I come to. It's a big difference. I'm the only one that seems to, in this regards, come to with my eyes just popping wide open. 1 minute I'm having a memory where I'm having an experience. The next minute it's the whole different ballgame. I'm in my house and it's the next day. I am in a tremendous controlled hysteria. That's the best way to put it, because I am immediately, where is Chad and where is our friend? I have a visual where I can see into my bedroom and I see a big lump in my bed. It's the blankies are pulled up over the head, and as I've said before, I can only see one big lump. I can't see 2 lumps, because this is where it would almost be acceptable that my friend is in bed with my husband. But that's not the case. I'm only seeing one big lump. And so that means she's missing. And then it also means I don't even know who's under the lump. As I start to head towards that direction, my bathroom happens to be right there. So I go right into my bathroom, get a pair of tweezers to pull this, whatever the hay is in my arm, out. I have a very bizarre experience in the bathroom over this object in my arm. Now I can't get to Chad fast enough, praying to God that that's Chad. Well, thank God the lump is mine. It's Chad, and he's now out of bed heading towards me. And again, painting you the visual, I'm expecting him to explain everything, and I can see in his face immediately he's lost. And so we discover, I'm correct, Amundo, he is clueless. Last thing he remembers is standing on that street corner at 11 the night before. So he has no memory, where I have a very distinct memory of what I call the in-between. And then I seem to be the only one out of the three of us with an object, something additional with my body from this experience. So now again, depending on how you'd like to take us, Chad has had regression, and he has what I feel is a pretty good account. There's still a whole lot more in there that I know, if given another opportunity, I feel would probably be unveiled, but he has a pretty good account of what seems to have happened to him that night, and possibly our friend. We're not positive about that, but take note of this. If you do hear this, I'm not in any part of his story at all. And in my memory of that night, he's not part of my story, nor is our friend. So it's all just very individualized accounts.
So
and very different.
Yeah, it sounds like you were separated with whatever was going on. Well, let's. I would definitely like to hear Chad's account of what he remembers under hypnosis, and then then let's talk about the whole. Because I do have a lot of questions as we move through the show here, regarding all the different types of activity you've been having there. So, Chad, could you tell us a little bit about your story on what you remember from that night?
Yeah, certainly. So, again, I remember everything like Alta had said earlier, about everything being so weird. So what comes out in my regression is we're standing on, about mid-block. Our friend had rejoined us, and we're standing about mid-block at that stoop, and I noticed this very bright light, like coming from around the corner and through the windows of the little place that was on the other end of the corner. And get the girl's attention. We walk around the corner onto Frenchman Street, and we look up in the sky, and about half a block down the street, it's probably about 15 foot off the ground, there's this orb, and it's about 12 foot in diameter. It's this very white, clean, clear blue, clear, or not clear, white, just light orb. It's just beautiful. And it sits there for just a few seconds, and all of a sudden it just comes towards us and just engulfs us. It orbducts us. It just takes us in. My next memory is I'm walking down this corridor. I'm following this little being. He's probably about 3.5, 4 foot tall. Big bulbous head. Now, I only saw him from behind. I didn't see his face or anything like that I can remember. He's kind of dwarfish, he kind of waddles when he walks. He's not like the little grays that you see on TV or anything like that. Out of the corner of my eye to my left, I could see a tall blonde female walking beside me. Now, I didn't turn to see if this was our friend that was with us that night, but it does kind of describe her, so I'm not sure. My next memory is I'm in this room, and it just seems to go on forever. It just seems infinite, just huge, very, very dark. Now, I could see my immediate surroundings, and off in the distance to my left, I could see a tall blonde female laying on an examining table. There were 3 beings around her, very tall. They're like 7, 8 foot tall, very praying mantis-y looking, buggish looking. I focus my attention back to my immediate, and to my right, I see this little blue being. And when I say blue, he was like this vibrant, electric, just beautiful blue color. you know, and his aura, his demeanor, just, he felt like a professor / shaman, scientist, healer, you know, this just old, ancient, just forever knowledge. He goes over and he picks up this box and he has it in his right hand. He takes his left hand and puts it into the side of the box. And when he pulls his hand out, there's this substance kind of free floating above his hand a few inches. It's about the size of a quarter silver dollar, something like that. It's kind of undulating. It's blue, the same kind of color blue he is, but you could kind of see through it. It was kind of clear. Had little metal glittery flakes in it. Now, I don't even remember him setting the box down, but he takes his right hand and he only has 4 digits. And he puts his 2 middle fingers up almost kind of like in a peace sign, and his outer fingers folded in towards his palm. And when he does this substance starts spinning. And the faster it spun, the glitterness and the blue color kind of dissipate out of it and kind of orbiting and spinning around it. And it starts slowing down, and it had turned into this double-pointed crystal pyramid. And very clean, very clear. And I remember thinking to him, why are you showing this to me? I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. This is something very important. Why are you showing this to me? And he told me that I would know in time, or when it's time. My next memory is I'm in this other room. There's only 3 walls, 2 that are very straight and 1 that's kind of concave. And there's this overstuffed leather chair in the middle of the room, just seems out of place. I remember thinking to myself, it looks comfortable, but it's not. So I'll walk a little closer to the wall that's kind of concaved. And what I thought was a solid wall, all the walls like went down the corridor and in this room, the walls are very metallic color, very tall walls, very clean, clear, no rivets, no bolts. I focus my attention to the wall that's concaved, and I'll get a little closer to it. And what I thought was a solid wall, I could see through it. It was transparent. And I could see stars and planets, and, it was like I was out in the universe somewhere. And I'm sitting there in awe, and all of a sudden, this little craft just outside this wall window shoots past. And it gets about 9-10 foot past me, and it stops. And it comes back, and we're like face to face, and it's outside this wall. And I'm looking at it, and it seemed to be almost like doing a double take. So it comes back, and it's right outside the wall. It's about 3 foot long, 2 foot wide, at the kind of a rugby ball shaped. Had little wires and antennas moving around on it, little lights blinking on it. I could feel intelligence coming out of it. It sat there for, maybe 30 seconds at the most and shot off. And my next memory is waking up in bed the next morning.
It's interesting that there are a lot of people who have had abduction experiences claim the same thing, where they're shown something and you have no idea what it is and go, well, you'll know in the future. Oh, gee, why give it to me now?
Yeah, but, right. Tell me in the future. Yeah, do it all at once.
Yeah, why don't you tell me when it's time?
Yeah.
It's infuriating.
Oh.
Infuriating. And, Chad has, he also didn't mention there were other beings that he encountered at a far on that craft, if this is what he's on, that looked like praying mantis type, if you will, that were very possibly with our friend. But again, without any guarantee, we have no idea, is she a part of this, having this encounter with him as well, because her account of what happened to her is extremely different than Chad's and mine.
Well, the praying mantis beings have been reported in many cases, and I know they're usually attributed to being higher up on the hierarchy of the aliens who seem to be working together. So that's very interesting. Now, with this whole situation, was this the only time you've ever had an encounter like this, or has anything else happened since?
As far as, like, I guess of the fourth kind, this is the only thing I have seen craft in the sky and other things have happened, but this is the only time I ever remember actually being with a being.
And I, on the other hand, had another experience. Chad and I had left New Orleans and moved to Alabama, rural Alabama. We were buying a home at the time, kind of out in the boonies, just on the outskirts of the small town. It was a lake town, and had some small woods behind our property. And one night we go to bed, normal night. Next thing I know, I remember, I'm in bed with Chad. Everything is just normal, perfect. But the next thing I know, I'm awake. I'm conscious. I'm now standing in my backyard, and I'm having a full-blown encounter. And at the end of that encounter, I was positive that I had another object. I refer to these as unknowns. Other people call them implants. I've never used that word. So from my perspective, I call these unknowns. I had another unknown happen with my wrist of that same arm. So, again, seems to be happening to me on that level, certainly more than once. Now, our friend, if I might mention, because she's given us permission to speak on her behalf, I got her portion of this in writing several years ago, but she is so, with the few years that passed from 97 of when this happened to the three of us, I think it was about 7 years later, I asked her if she would write this, because she'd made it clear to us that she never intended to go public, to be public, because I told her I would never stop trying to get help or trying to find others or what have you. Never intended to be public. Neither one, Chad nor I did, nor did we ever intend to write books. This was never an intention. It's just kind of been the aftermath. But so in her case, she records or she writes for us that I have online. I've never brought it out publicly because it is so vague, what we discovered. And she admits she's losing fast memory, it would seem, of what little she didn't remember anyway. And so I find that very odd, because when the three of us are having that experience that night, that hour and a half, we're all out there together, we're very aware that this is off, that everything is happening, but that it's happening in such a bizarre manner. But in her case, she's losing that memory or has lost that memory. But just again, I'll encapsulate that with, just so you have something to really ponder about how different these experiences seem to be for the three of us. In her case, just briefly prior to that night of the three of us, I call it being taken. She had a boyfriend that she was only seeing just for a very brief time in her life. He was her opposite. Now, she's tall, slender, long blonde haired, 24 at the time, a beautiful laugh, very attractive, a no mess around kind of gal. She's, no drama queen. Very loves to laugh, but also has a very strong sense of right and wrong. And I don't remember her being into sci-fi or any of this either. But again, who knows? Anyhow, she decides she doesn't want to see this guy any longer. She invites him over to her apartment. She lives in a duplex at the time. It's broad daylight. They stand out on the front porch, and she's just a couple inches in front of this guy, and she's telling him, I paraphrase this, I like your butt kind of story. I want to see other folks. She says he becomes so upset that it's also as if he's becoming, unglued from the inside out as well. And she said he turned into a wolf. She said her head flipped away from it instantly in shock. She said when she looked back, he must have shape-shifted back into human and then shifted a second time into this wolf. Now, there was no doubt to me that she was telling me her truth. There was no doubt. Because this is not something I don't think she's gone around and told anybody else. And I feel that the only reason she would have shared this with me, probably because she was supposed to for this story, because we don't understand anything that's happening to us. But also, my take on it is because I have this native background. And shape-shifting and all this kind of language is fairly common, if you will. It would seem among most tribes, if not all tribes. So, anyhow, that was her experience, just very briefly to the night of us being taken. She claims that the last thing she remembers is 11 o'clock, just like Chad and I on that corner. And then the next thing she knows, it's somewhere between 3 and 4 in the next morning. She's now been put behind the steering wheel of her moving car, and it's moving very slowly. She said it hit a parked car, and it knocked off her rear view mirror. She said this is what jolted her too. On top of the craziness of all of that, she also indicates that the car is in a different location. It's not in the French Quarter any longer where she parked the car that morning. It's, miles away from that, in another section of the city of New Orleans. So, this is her awakening. She ends up in the neighborhood of Wolfie Boy, somebody that there's no doubt to Chad and I, she would never see again, ever, after having this kind of bizarre encounter. This would not be somebody she'd go out of her way to ever want to see again. But this is where she ends up after the night we're taken. She said that when she gets into his hood, he lives in an old house, an apartment in an old house that's normally got a big gate around it locked, and it's not this particular morning. She gets up into his front porch. He's right inside the door playing guitar. She said that, he stops playing guitar and says something crazy to her. Here's some more of the cryptic stuff. Either I've been waiting for you or we've been waiting for you. She said she becomes very, my word is like a controlled hysteria where she starts crying. And she said, which is not her nature. She said he puts the guitar down and walks her into a room, lays her down. She said that, her eyes open up and the sun looks like it's just starting to rise. So she hasn't been there apparently very long. And she said she gets up. She said she's dressed and doesn't appear that he's done anything to her. But she gets the F out of there and doesn't look back. Now, that's her account of, what happens to her prior to this experience that night of being taken, and then the follow-through of what she's got all those hours in between that's completely blank. If I might now, again, just for the context of the story, thanks so much for letting me get this far with it. Speaking again on her behalf.
That's quite all right.
He's in the story one last time, Wolfie Boy. And what I mean by that is this happened to us in 97, fast forward to 2001. Chad and I have separated. Chad has moved to Alabama to go to work for his dad in small town Alabama. I've chosen to stay behind. One day I get out of work and it's during the daytime. It's a beautiful afternoon. Streets are packed like normal. I hear somebody yell my name. I meet this person, I go across the street through the crowd and I see it's an old friend I haven't seen in a couple of years. His name is Rich. He's a traveling artist who's originally from Montauk, New York. Back in the day, I don't know nothing about Montauk. I know a lot about it now, meaning a lot of what I've discovered, the high strangeness, connected with that area, the history. So anyhow, he wants to play catch up. We sit down at an outdoor cafe and get a drink. He orders a Coke. I remember, I think, a beer. He is hearing all about Chad and I breaking up and just really how devastated I am and just how hard this is on me. And I can feel lots of sympathy and confusion coming out of him about this story. But then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he shifts the story from being the compassionate soul that I felt blessed to have and needed. He then shifted immediately to, had I heard about Will? And out of nowhere, this question came at me. And I was in beyond shock, and I'm like, Will, Dark Boy? I didn't even know you knew him, kind of coming back at him because I'm in shock again. And he says, yeah, he's gone around telling everybody he's got to catch a bus to get out of New Orleans because the aliens are after him. Now, again, just the end of that little story is, just so you understand, really my need to get it said more than anything is because at that point now I'm not thinking anything paranormal. I'm just pissed. I'm positive that I'm on some bad camera show, some bad candy camera something. And I'm looking for the cameras because this just comes out of left field at a time of where I felt very devastated in my life. And it was like just this gut punch. And I wasn't laughing. And so this guy immediately's got to go. After he drops that on me, he's got to go. So we hug our goodbye, and I'm left there with my mouth hanging open saying, this is just a really, really bad movie that I'm stuck in and I can't seem to get out of. So, yeah, that's the Wolfie Boy story, the cryptid, connection with her.
That's very wild and very very high strangeness. Now, this was all relatively around that time period of when this event happened. Is there anything else that may have happened after this that might be related to the event? Or do you think that you have experienced another similar event since that time?
Well, right. And Chad and I have also seen a daylight craft since then. We've also, it's got some, as if seeing is not enough, there's some high strangeness associated with that that happened in 2011, I believe. And then most recently, just this last year, Chad and I have just returned to the New Orleans area. We've been gone since 2001. We've only returned this last year. So it's been 15 years we've been gone from this area. This last year, before we'd made the decision to return here, because this again came out of left field, this was certainly not our intention, was to come back here. But it was, so this would have made it 2015, 16. We were vendoring. We chose to sell our home and most of our possessions and buy a motorhome, a used motorhome that we could afford, and travel. The idea was to live this way for the rest of our lives intentionally and just travel and be free and make our way. Having an older motorhome, we, again, in over our heads, we had to stay within the Ohio Valley. So a several state area, we traveled for 5 years, consistently doing metaphysical shows every weekend, UFO gatherings, whatever it was that we would fit the genre. We're also traveling artists. We make a wearable art. And Chad's quite a craftsman. And so I'm a medium, and so we offered our services and just made our way. And love that life, I might add. Hard way to make it, but we were doing well. And only due to the fact that the motorhome, it's a motorhome, which means a lot of money involved in engines and so on. It's required more help than we had money for. So we understood this was happening to us. But before we made this decision to return to New Orleans, because we had to think about where could I work, offering what I offer. Well, the land of tourism, and certainly where this all happened for us originally, and the book. But we were vendoring for a weekend in mounds at
Serpent Mound.
Thank you, Chad. Help me.
Serpent Mound.
This location called Serpent Mound, Ohio, which is, one of the sacred sites in the world that has, I think, been pretty dormant for a long time in terms of attention, but lots of attention is starting to happen with it now in particular. Still a lot of mystery associated with Serpent Mound. Well, anyhow, Chad and I were vendoring at a gathering there. This would have been this last year. We had a young couple come and stay with us in the motorhome. They lived a couple hours away. They came and decided to spend the weekend with us. So it's the four of us hanging outside the motorhome. We're staying outside of Serpent Mound, about, I don't know, 30-minute drive or so, out in the wilderness. And it's beautiful. This park is beautiful. So anyhow, we build a big fire. A very strange event takes place between the girlfriend and Chad and that fire that seemed to set the night for showing us that we were going to have a strange night. And then the whole night consisted of a light show in the sky for us from horizon to horizon that went on for hours. And it was not lightning, and it wasn't meteorites or, comets. It was absolutely very intentional, and it would appear in different manner. Chad was positive, and there was no doubt. We were watching him as he was watching. He was seeing structured craft high up in the sky, and all of us were having our experiences watching this to the point of where we got tired. Our necks got sore from keeping them cranked back and watching this all night long going on around us. So we all just finally got exhausted and went to bed. But that was just this last year. So it would appear that this stuff, whatever this is all about, is certainly continuing.
Do you, Alta, do you feel that maybe more in your childhood you might have had experiences that you haven't remembered, or do you have any indications? Because in a lot of cases, these things seem to follow from very early childhood. I mean, even in the Betty and Barney Hill case in the 60s, their case was famous, yet it came out later under hypnosis that they had had experiences their entire lives.
Right. Well, exactly. A great question, and thanks. We love the questions. Never have been asked enough of them as far as I'm concerned. So my first, as I mentioned, my mother indicated to a few people in her life, she had a lot of mystery in her life. I have thus had a lot of mystery in my life. And I've had no family or anybody to reflect with, to try to get any answers from. My mother raised me pretty much alone, and seemed to keep me in movement a lot when I'm young. So to, move on with this, I don't have any childhood memories at all up until I'm around 9 years old. Prior to that, it's blank. So my first memory is, so I'll remind, what I mentioned earlier is that my mother claimed that a small metallic craft came down out of the sky and stopped her on a highway out in a desert, with me being the only passenger in the car. If there's any truth to anything she said about that, and if there's a reality to that, it would seem it started for me from the beginning, whatever that means. But my first actual memory doesn't happen until I'm 9, and it happens to be I'm in a military hospital, and I'm being tested for what they commonly used, but was new at the time, the term ESP. So that is my first memory. It's very brief, it's extremely acute, and it's there. But it's that it seems like my lights go out fairly soon after that, because this is in Aurora, Colorado. This would have made it in the 60s. I don't remember leaving Aurora, Colorado and moving with my mother and my stepfather at the time to the Midwest, which is where my longest period of living was. And that was from the age of around 9, 10 to second year of college. So, yeah, a lot of mystery.
Were either of your parents in the military?
No.
Usually,
but again, I have no complete. There's a lot of mystery, as I keep saying. I hate to make it sound so cryptic, but that's what I've been handed in my life regarding my mother.
Have you thought of going through a hypnotic regression to try to recover those memories?
Well, not in particularly as much that, but I did pay a woman a lot of money in cash who was is world-renowned in the field of regression. It did not go well for me at all with her, and we were not in sync with each other. And so, needless to say, I had some amazing high strangeness take place, but the regression absolutely did not happen. So I've not been able to connect with anybody since. I don't want to hand over that kind of money again to be what I felt was not treated well. So it didn't, in my case, it didn't work, but I am absolutely open, I assure you. I also feel the same, if I might, while we're on that subject, to anybody that's kind enough to hear us. Chad is open as well to having regression again, because the lovely lady that regressed him, they got along quite lovely. But this woman, we didn't know at the time, was not, and this was a paid service. So it wasn't like anything has ever been done for nothing. And we appreciate that. We understand that. But this woman, we discovered after the fact, which is not a good time, but this was a long ago. We're not like that now. That she was not trained in the area of ET, alien abduction. Her expertise, we discovered, was in remote viewing and what have you. So as well as they got along, and it's amazing that Chad got as much of the story as he's shared with you out. I listened to the tape, the regression, and every time Chad would get to a location or an area where he's talking about beings, because if you took note of that, he's with at least 3 different types, possibly 4, who knows how many, in that one night or that one event. But every time he'd get into that area, she would become very afraid, and you could hear her move him away from it rather than allow him to experience it and really, share all that's in there. So we're just really looking forward to the opportunity, if it's ever allowed again, to have, this done again for both of us.
Well, let me ask Chad, do you have any memories of high strangeness events when you were growing up?
Yeah, there's been a few. My dad was a farmer in Arkansas, kind of in the deltas of Arkansas, actually. And this was I was probably about 7 years old or so. We were living in a house, and we had like this soybean field next to us. And I remember going out, and my dad, my uncle, my grandfather, and it was just not far from the house. It was kind of between us and the shop where they had the tractors and all, and they worked on the tractors. And there were these 3 circles out in the middle of the crop. They were burnt, and they were probably 12, 15 foot diameter, and there were 3 of them, and they were bam, bam, just right in a row. And, my dad and my uncle and dad, they farmed all their lives. So, and they were confused on what it was and, how it happened. But that was kind of one of the things. There were some other things my dad had told me about that happened to him, kind of more paranormal, kind of poltergeisty thing, but not a lot. Just that one incident is really that stands out.
So you had the experience in New Orleans 20 years ago, and you've gone on past it and gone on with your lives. Why now? Why is now the time for you to tell this story?
So we've been telling now since probably about 2011, I think, is our first interview. That was done not by our invitation. We were under the impression that we were going to be investigated by a researcher. And that's all we're asking for, is to get help, and whatever that means, and find others and, share and so on. I've got 2 objects that are in my body, and, just trying to have understanding and support. So this person decided that, at the time she had a podcast, a small podcast, I believe, and she said she wanted us to come on her show. And we were confused, but we're very agreeable when we understand somebody is truly putting interest in us. We think you know best. And so we were puzzled, but we agreed to this. We got on the show and we, shared what time allowed for us to share. And for whatever the reasons are, she decided. I might add, we did quite well for her. We were shocked because we've never done anything like this before, and it was nothing we were prepared for. But apparently her ratings went very high, and she was off and running in that world, and basically let go of us. So at that point now, I just didn't know what else to do. As I say, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. I was trying very hard to stay consistent, and things were consistently happening to us and around us. And so at that point, it just kind of took off running with constantly doing interviews. Again, people can think anything they choose. We've certainly been accused of it all, and we take no effort over being hurt by it any longer or confused by it any longer. We understand everybody has the right to think any way that they choose to. We didn't feel we had any other recourse, or I didn't. Let me say that. Chad's just been very agreeable as a good mate to move forward with this because, as Chad says as often as he can, he's never felt threatened by the beings or these experiences. You hear him giving you explanation that is quite, I find it amazing and awe-inspiring in many ways to listen to him. I certainly felt that about my encounter, most of my encounter. So we've tried to express this as honestly as we know how. The book, this small book, is, I might add, we are the first to come forward in print for the good or the bad of this. And also the word Orbducted has been created. This is a brand new word that we're going to work very hard to try to get into the lexicon, because we know that there are many of us out here who are having these experiences. So we're trying to give language to it. And that's where we're at with it. Again, there was no going backwards once we were brought forward.
The title Orbduction is very unusual, and the fact that you've seen and your experience happen from this big light, do you feel that light itself was a craft, or do you feel that possibly you may have even shifted into another dimension?
Yes.
Yes. yes. But if I might add, I just listened to because I'm the researcher now of our little family. Chad is so willing to hear me when I'm like, I got to share this with you, Chad. This is what I'm understanding is, the discussion out there now in all these different venues, these different genres, because we've been experiencing all these different genres, seems to be wrapped up in one. But, Dr. Stephen Greer, that the world seems to be pretty familiar with, he's not somebody that I go out of my way necessarily to listen to. I give him all the credit in the world, more power to him. But I did happen to catch something just yesterday that he has posted about him, giving a big lecture and indicating to folks that he's very aware that orbs that he claims they all call in are actual these orbs are full of craft and beings. Now, this is Dr. Stephen Greer's language, indicating that they're very aware, because they have seen that these orbs are not just balls of light. So I say, like Chad said, we say yes to all of it, because I've been forced to expand my brain to the point of where I'm positive it doesn't seem to exist any longer in any form that I remember, where I'm constantly questioning absolutely everything. The more so-called answers there are, the more questions I have. So
I honestly,
have no answers.
I honestly feel that a lot of it is just may simply lie outside of our comprehension. We're only able to take concepts so far with these meat brains up here that that we've learned a lot, but we've got so much to learn, and so much of the technology that these beings and entities seem to be able to use defy modern laws of physics. I mean, between the lights, the floating in and out of walls and ceilings, it looks like magic to us, and yet it's some form of high technology. So what is it that, I don't know. I just find the whole thing very strange.
Exactly. Yeah. And this is the reason why I have, from the very beginning, all the years ago when we were asked to come forward, have used the word unknown rather than the word implant, in particular with what's going on with my body. Because I have no memory, out of all my memory, there's no memory of this object being implanted in my arm. So I've always associated the word unknown with it. And then in all of my research, I discovered there's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Kuntz, Robert Kuntz, I think is his first name. Now, this was years ago when I found his work posted. He was connected with Dr. Roger Lear, and this is prior to Lear's death. Kuntz was, one of Lear's compadres in the field of, I believe he's a physicist. And so he was looking at some of these, what they called implants that they had removed, studying them, and what he allowed posted on what I was able to find online. And I am extremely limited because I don't understand computers at all. But what I discovered is Kuntz reports a whole lot of scientific language way above my head, physicist kind of language. But then he also uses very simplistic language that I got immediately, and that is that whoever or whatever responsible for these objects, he felt, or he didn't feel, he said, we're at least 100 million years in advance of human. And so I've said this in the past, and I'll stick to it until somebody straightens me out. That was enough for me. That's incomprehensible. And so I just would like for folks to, it was so lovely. It's refreshing to hear you, Mark, say things like that, because, most people aren't talking this way, and I find that kind of sad.
Yeah, I think so many people are not looking into it. There's just been such an effective campaign over the last 40 years of just 40, 50 years of dumbing people down, dismissing it. The media dismisses it. Even if they do a reporting, they're always tongue-in-cheek, what we call the snicker factor, playing X-Files music in the background, so nobody takes it seriously. But right. It's very much a real phenomenon. And, it seems like you've had experiences of all types of high strangeness, between the abduction that night. So you've experienced everything from the abduction to a ghostly phenomenon, time slips, and everything. What about cryptids? You might as well run the whole gamut here.
Exactly. And while we're at it, we'll throw this in your list and see if this, if there's interest there as well. Also, a dude that we call him the black-eyed dude rather than black-eyed children, this black-eyed adult experience that happened with Chad. Let's add to the mix. Chad and I both having separate experiences within 24 hours of each other. No, sorry, actually having separate experiences at the same time with black cars. Terrifying, in my case, terrifying. And then one more to add to the mix. If you're familiar, I would think, Mark, you are, the name Andrew Bishago. Is that a name that registers with you at all?
Yep, I know Andy very well.
Right. So if I might add that to the mix as well. So, Bishago, when he's coming out originally back like in 2009, because I am steeped into it, listening to anything I can get my ears on, of folks out there claiming to have missing time alien, whatever they're claiming, I'm listening to. And so I'm not particularly interested in his Pegasus business in terms of space, because I'm still not into that necessarily. But I am listening to him because he sounds very convinced. And so I'm appreciating he's convinced. Well, he gets my attention over a statement that he makes. He indicates that when he's a little boy, one of the locations he claims, and I'm probably not using the correct term, that he's time portaled into, either out of New Jersey or California. I don't remember where the location was he was portaled out of, but it absolutely took my breath away when he said where he was portaled into. And it was an area called Cerrillos, New Mexico. Well, I would have never heard of that place before in my life. I think prior to, what happened to us when we left New Orleans after 97, I am compelled, with no explanation, to leave New Orleans. Chad did not want to leave. I can't stay. So Chad is a good partner, and against his will, we move. Now we head to New Mexico. I have no reason for it other than compelled. I'll try to shorten that story up. We end up in Albuquerque. That's not where we're supposed to be. Well, what in the hell am I saying? What do I mean that's not where we're supposed to be? Well, I come out of this place one day that we're renting in the deserts of Albuquerque, and I look up and there's a mountain ridge all the way around Albuquerque, and I point up and I'm like, Chad, we're going up there. Well, we take a day trip. We end up in a community up in the mountains, a village. It's not even a town, it's a village. Looks like Petticoat Junction, if you remember that old show.
I do, yes.
That's to me kind of the visual. And when I say Petticoat Junction, you can't get a telephone. This is about 1999, I believe. You can't get a telephone, and you can't get television. It is so remote. So this Cerrillos is 2 miles away from this little village. Cerrillos is more primitive than Petticoat Junction. Cerrillos looks like it has not advanced 1 minute over the 1800s. It looks like a ghost town. Now, there's folks that live there, but you don't see them. It absolutely looks like a ghost town in the middle of the desert. When I hear Andy say Cerrillos is where he was time portaled into when he was a little boy with other children, we'd already experienced that area. I know he's telling some kind of truth. I don't know what the truth is, but I know he's convinced, because that is a very bizarre, strange environment. Well, as I said, it looks like it's been wiped off the map in terms of current history, and something again that's straight out of the 1800s. And Andy claims that they were portaled into a welcoming center in the back of this community that would have been further back in the desert where you never saw it. But I looked all that up, and that location certainly existed. Certainly not listed as a time portal location.
Obviously not, no.
But there is a structure there. And so because of our crazy experiences up there, this is the same area that the dude that's eyes turned cold black against Chad, that's where he lived, was in this creepy place that was like out of time and space. So we were having lots of bizarre kinds of high strangeness happening to us, as well as cryptids. Yeah.
And also my father, my brother had seen a what they called Bigfoot not too long before I had moved moved to Alabama, and but when we were up in the travels, and I think we were doing something in or around Waverly, Ohio, kind of a ghost, kind of paranormal little thing, and I'd found this campground because again we're in the motorhome. But I mean, it was way up on the mountain, and I did not know it was that far up. But anyway, we make it up there, get the camp set up and everything, and we make dinner, and so it's starting to get dark. So I'm gonna walk we have 2 dogs. So I'm gonna walk the dogs down the road, kind of let them do their business, and before bed. And I walk down the road, very, very dark. I mean, this is way up in the mountains there, just beautiful. And we're walking down the road and come back, and we just get almost, we're probably 4 yards from the house, the motorhome, and I hear. And I'm from the country, I know sounds of the woods and everything. I've been in and out of it all my life, and I hear what I call a grunt snort. It's like kind of thing, and it sounded like it was just like right there beside us. The dog stopped and looked. They didn't bark, they didn't whine, they didn't nothing. They just looked.
And if I might add, keep in mind, as he's describing this, we've got a red heeler, an Australian red heeler, and the other one is an Australian Shepherd mix. So these are herding dogs. Yeah. They're not dogs to run away. Right. But they want away.
They look, I look, and I'm like, what the heck? So I run into the house, and I'm like, Alta, I don't know what I heard, but it was like, it's just, and she's like, it's Sasquatchy. It's Sasquatch. I'm like,
and I'm all excited.
I'm like, hey, I believe you, because I ain't never heard anything like that before. So she goes, we got to give him an offering. So, like I said, we'd had, I did grilled hot dogs, and I think we had chips and stuff like that. So here we are making him a hot dog.
Made him a Bigfoot barbecue.
Yeah.
Including chocolates and dessert.
Chocolates, Cheetos, and we had those little cinnamon jelly things with the sugar on it.
Weenie on the bun with all the fixings.
Weenie on the bun with the fixings and everything. Yeah. We put it on a paper plate.
Yeah.
And I take it outside. I'm like, oh, great. Here we go. Oh, please don't be around the corner. I'm just, I'd just hand it up to him and, close my eyes and play, just praise. Doesn't eat me, and so I go over, and there's like this fallen tree right back behind the motorhome. So I set it on the tree, that way if something does touch it, it'll fall off, or whatever. It's not gonna, it'll make a mess if it's just something that's not intelligent, so we get in, go to bed, everything.
Very smart, Jim.
Yeah. We get in, go to bed, go to sleep, and everything. And before Alta wakes up, and before I could even get my eyes open,
it's like
she's
Christmas morning.
It's like Christmas morning. Santa Claus is here. She's like, go check the plate. I'm like, oh, all right, okay. So I get up and I go outside, come around, and the plate is still sitting on this fallen tree. Everything was off the plate except those cinnamon jellies. And there's like, the ground is clean. There's no footprints. There's no crumbs. There's no, scattered food all over the place. It's not like, if it was a dog or a coon, they would have knocked the plate over and scattered the food, or, it wouldn't have been so clean. You wouldn't have thought. And I bring it in, and she's like, oh my God. So that happened. And then a couple of nights later, we're walking down through the woods, because we're just on this pretty much deserted road. And we're walking down the road, and we just kept hearing this crazy chatter. And we could hear walking out in the woods, And,
sorry, this was actually daytime, not night.
Yeah. This
daytime.
Yeah. Early evening. And so we're walking down through there, and we could just hear this chatter, and it felt feminine almost, and young, almost like there was more than one, but never could see anything. But this chatter was almost,
it was following us.
Yeah.
On both sides.
Very primitive, Native American-y, couldn't understand. But we end up talking to the lady that run the park, that owned the park. She had owned this park all of her life. Have grown up on that mountain all of her life. Her husband was a prison guard, so tough people. She said that, first of all, that the Sasquatch hunters were Bigfoot hunters was up there just like a month.
Show.
The television show. Right. They were up there a month or so before we were up there.
Finding Bigfoot, or as I call it, not finding Bigfoot.
Yeah, that's them.
Yeah.
And so they're all up there.
That we didn't know nothing about.
We had no idea. This, the Moneymaker and all them were up there. But she said that her and her friend, her husband did the night shift at the prison. So it's her and her friend, and she's a tough lady. She said
born on that mountain.
Yeah, born on that mountain, knew that mountain. And she said her and her friend were outside in the backyard. They had their glass of wine, and they're just chilling. And then all of a sudden, she said that this crazy feeling came over.
They knew.
And they knew that something was watching them. They could hear something out in the right close out in the woods, but knew it felt like it was watching them.
I'm gonna eat her.
And I mean, she said she got up, they grabbed their wine, they went in the house. But,
never before.
Yeah, had never had that happen before, never since. But
and she was in her 50s or so.
Yeah.
So that it absolutely, that feeling scared her straight into her house, and must have made contact with those Bigfoot hunters, folks, whatever, and they all loaded up and took over that mountain. I guess apparently right before we got there, and I don't remember hearing anything happening with them, but it certainly was happening with us.
Probably not, but then they're too busy doing other things for the television show, like not finding Bigfoot. But anyway,
exactly. Well, speaking of finding Sasquatchy, Chad kind of blew over it sort of quickly, but if we might, I love the story about his father and his brother, because this only happened just a few years back. We're not talking 30 years ago. This was, just probably 10 years ago or so. The father is, they're living in a small lake community, as I said, rural kind of Alabama, about 3 hours out of Atlanta. And that's the major airport oftentimes. So dad's got to make it to the airport for early flight.
Yeah, early flight. It was like, it was just getting light. They were
sun just
going through what they call the Talladega National Forest, right there on I-20. And they said that they're driving and they see what they thought was like a backpacker kind of, on the side of the road up, leaning up against the metal railing. And they said they get a little closer and a little closer. And then all of a sudden this thing stands up. It's not a backpack, it's his back. And he stands up. And as they're driving past it, he's kind of...
Only one's on the road.
Yeah. This thing, they said it was like 7-8 foot tall, very hairy. They said huge. It kind of pivots towards, the forest, but watches them as they drive by.
Looks at them.
This thing takes a couple of steps and is gone into the woods. But it was like, it was right there.
And it was all seeming to be personal for them.
Yeah.
Because there's no other there's nobody else around.
Like it was waiting for them to come by?
Right.
Yeah.
It was like waiting for them. He was on this side of the highway instead of, like a normal hiker on the other side of the divide. I mean, it's just... And this father, this experience, well, I had the most terrifying experience I would honest to God say of my life. And I've had a lot of scary stuff happen to me that involved what I understand are so many Sasquatchy that I could not count them. And nobody believes me. So I stopped telling this story. But again, not for lack of, I know what I experienced. And I was positive I was dead. There was no doubt to me that at the end of that experience, I was dead. And the woman that was with me, she was dead with me. We were going to be their meal. But our whole experience was all invisible. And it all seems to have been done for the purpose of terror, sound, and energy. And so, a lot more to our story, needless to say, but sticking with his dad and his brother, they saw this up close and personal encounter that feels very personal to me about them. But we'll have Chad also, again, if you have time, share with you what the father saw with his current wife, Chad's stepmother, down in Cancun, Mexico.
Sure, we have about 6 minutes left in the program, so that should be enough time.
Yeah, this happened in 2000, and when I go back to Alabama, and I'm telling them the story about this craft that we had seen in Hammond, Louisiana, this big, huge mothership that we seen in '95. I'm sharing this with them, and they're going, I can see their minds thinking. And my stepmother, she's like, we went down to Cancun for the millennial. And so, and we go down, and it's nighttime. We're getting ready to go listen to watch the fireworks. She says, and they're down there with another couple. And they said they got their chairs set up, down on the beach, outside the hotel, and the fireworks start going off. Well, they decide to move up the cove a little bit because the lighting from the hotel was kind of affecting them being able to see the fireworks. So they move up the cove of this beach a little bit, and they sit their chairs underneath what they called the Temple of the Puma. And they said they get down, they sit down, and all of a sudden they hear this big cat scream, like a large cat. So that kind of sets the tempo. And then they focus their attention back to the fireworks and sitting there watching the fireworks. And they said they could see this craft, and they said that it sounded exactly like the craft that we've seen, in '95 with, kind of a rectangle shape, not as wide in the front, very huge. But they could, as the fireworks were going off, they could kind of see it up in the sky. And, I'm like, okay, life's not fair. They get to see theirs, above this Temple of the Puma in Cancun. Mine's above Walmart Shopping Center. But, hey, yeah, I guess we get to share it. I guess that's what counts. But, yeah, it was definitely, had something to do with, it's not just me and my family that's seen things, and my dad won't talk about it. My dad's not the type, but
no,
but
not up for conversation. Yeah. We feel blessed to have heard any of it.
That's very wild. Now that part in Cancun, where was it in Cancun? That temple of the Puma.
I'm not really sure. I have never looked it up.
It's on the beach.
I don't know.
They were on the beach.
They were on the beach, so I think it would be right there on the coast somewhere.
Probably Tulum, because Tulum is the...
Sounds probably right.
Possibly. Okay. Yeah. I went there once. I just don't remember the Temple of the Puma, but that was a long time ago. Well, we've just got a few more minutes left. I can probably try to squeeze in one more question. Now, with all this strangeness that you've been experiencing, what's the most recent thing that has happened for you?
In particular, as I just recently mentioned, what comes to mind very quickly is our last, what I call the light show that took place this last year around the Serpent Mound. If you all look into that, you'll see that has tremendous mystery associated with it, the Serpent Mound in itself. And this light show felt very personal for Chad and I and for our friends that had come to spend the weekend with us. So that was so big that, as I said, it was each one of us were having our own experiences and just in awe. Most of us stayed silent through all of this, just taking it all in. That's what comes to my mind.
Yeah,
most recent.
since we've been back here, we haven't really gotten out, explored or anything, in the French Quarter, in New Orleans or anything. So it's been kind of quiet this last year.
We've been too busy dodging hurricanes.
Yeah.
And
just trying to get on with life and get resituated where we can get back out on the road and come out to your part of the neck of the woods. And
we're trying to head west again, so more in that direction. So that's kind of where our minds have been and our attention and our focus. We do, if anybody is interested, and we so invite you, Mark, anytime this direction, but we have a book signing October 19th.
That's this Thursday at it's called Gallery 2. It's on the 800 block of Royal Street.
In the French Quarter.
So, please, if anybody is interested or in the area,
we're their inaugural book signing for this gallery, and this is our first opportunity. So this gives us a chance right where it happened, the 97 event. They're going to put a big map up, and Chad's going to actually show the folks that come for this the actual route. And we'd like to also mention, if we might very quickly, we had that Voodoo Temple apartment that we lived in that started all of this for us in 95.
Mm-hmm.
10 years after we lived there, a young couple moved into that apartment. You might know of this story, Mark. They're called Zach and Addie. They were a young couple that lived in our apartment. He killed her, and then he cut her up into pieces, and then he committed suicide. When they discovered, when they went to the apartment, off of his suicide note, they discovered parts of her on the stove, in the oven, and in the refrigerator. This insane experience took place in that apartment.
Yikes.
And it's called Nick Groff of the Zach Bagan crowd. He's, I guess, separated from that, the Ghosty Hunters.
Yes.
And he did a show, and it's called
Paranormal Lockdown.
Paranormal Lockdown.
It's called
you can YouTube
Rampart Murder House.
I'll look into that, because I know my friend David Roundtree was also a part of that show. Yeah, so I'm very familiar with the show.
He spent the night in the apartment with a gal that she must be a medium or what have you. I'm not sure her role. They spent a night in the apartment and documented that. That's called Rampart Murder House. Some guy came out of New York City when he learned about this murder and did a book that's now one of the best-selling books called either Shake Off the Devil or Shake the Devil Off. That tells you all about this apartment, this insanity. And then just to finish that, 10 years later, Chad and I have just returned to this area. We discovered this last year as we moved back here. That apartment and the temple have all burned down to the ground. So
it didn't burn down to the ground. The inside was
destroyed.
Pretty much gutted,
Yeah. The Voodoo Temple now has had to relocate itself down the road someplace else, but it all seems to be on this 10-year plan, so to say.
Well,
do check out that Zach and Addie's story. That's pretty mind-blowing.
I definitely will. Now, we have come to the end of the program. The book is called Orbducted in the French Quarter, and our guests have been Alta and Chad Dillard. Real briefly, where can people get a hold of you and get copies of the book?
Well, you can find us on Facebook at the moment. If they want to purchase the book, they can go through that. We go through PayPal, or we do sell them on Etsy. And also, if you're in the French Quarter and would like to pick up a copy, you can go by Earth Odyssey, where Alta works, and they carry our book. And again, October 19th, we'll be doing our book signing. So pick up a copy and we'll sign it for you.
Well, Alta and Chad, thank you very much for being on the show tonight. I love talking to you. Felt like we can go another hour easily. So you have to come back again sometime.
Well, we thank you so much.
We can't thank you enough. And again, our heart extended to your co-host or your hostess and all that she's going through as well. And you just have a great day, great night. Thanks again for having us.
Well, thank you, too. And thank you, everyone, for listening to Paranormal UK Radio here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And we'll catch you all next week. Have a good one.